Hi, my name is Inely Cesna. I'm an attorney, mediator, and coach. I've been mediating for over 10 years in different scenarios as an in-house corporate counsel, as a volunteer, and as a partner in my own firm. I would like to talk to you today about giving and receiving feedback, creating a culture of giving and receiving feedback as a way of growing and coming into resolution. So let's go right into the slides here. And here we go. So the title of this presentation is Neutral Yet Impactful, Giving and Receiving Feedback Without Losing Trust or Balance. So let's start by saying, why does feedback matter in the first place, right? Why feedback? Well, because we learned through our relationship with others. We learn through that which we see reflected in others, in that which we receive back from others. So it encouraged this idea of continuous learning. It creates self-awareness and growth. It's a way of improving our performance, but also improving that which the environment within which we're trying to mediate, the environment that you're cultivating through mediation. And it can build or erode trust depending on how it's delivered. And that's why it's important to take a moment to learn what's the effective way of giving and receiving feedback, right? So feedback is a tool to keep communication growing, to keep ourselves growing, to keep evolution. And as a mediator, we are in a very delicate position there, balancing between our neutrality and our leadership. How do I use feedback and yet maintain myself neutral, but also maintain control of the environment that I'm creating in a mediation? It's a very delicate balance and a very important one for mediators. So what makes feedback trustworthy? And I call it the Tachi formula. One is tone, right? Tone. To give feedback with a tone of caring and compassion and non-judgment. To be actionable, to create feedback that has an action step that tells me what to do next, how to move forward. To deliver it in an appropriate time, in an appropriate context, in a way that the other party can understand, it's open to receive and can receive, and with an intent to serve, an intent of service and clarity, rather than just simple criticism or just because I'm in a bad mood or something like that, right? To create this idea of service and clarity. So let's look at the art of giving feedback in a constructive way. First thing to do is use I language. It's not about you, it's about what I notice about you, is what about I see, is the opportunities that I see, so that I'm bringing to the table, right? And in those opportunities, I'm actually separating behavior from identity. What I see in the other is not so much who they are, but the behavior that they are expressing at that moment in time. Behaviors are like clothes. We can take on, take off, we can change. They are mutable. And so it's very important to not create an identity of someone based on their behavior, and really understand that the essence of someone else and of ourselves go far beyond behavior. Offer them the benefit of the doubt. If I don't know, then I'll offer the best interpretation possible, offer the benefit of the doubt, and invite their reflection, right? After we give our feedback, what's your take on this? What do you think of this? How is that landing for you? And in doing that, create agreements and not expectations. So not simply expecting others to do or say or behave in a certain way, but actually get their agreement that they agree that that's what they want to say or do or behave, right? So it's a two-side mechanism. So let's look at the feedback framework. And I like this framework because it gives you like sort of a step-by-step. There's a lot in feedback literature, in the literature about giving feedback that talks about that sandwich, right? Positive, negative, positive. You say something positive, then you give your feedback, you say what you want to change, and then you say something positive again. It's the sandwich. Yes, that may work, but it also becomes old very, very fast, because when we realize that that's the framework that is used, the minute you come up with something positive, the other side is already thinking, oh, something else is going to come out of this. Oh, what else is coming? And so it kind of takes away the whole intention of the feedback. Now, this framework, my experience has shown a lot more effective than the sandwich mentality. So this tells you to talk about the situation, when and where it happened, so it's present there. What was the behavior that was observed? What impact did it have? What was the effect of that behavior? And what action to do instead? And then invite reflections. What's your view on this? What's your perspective? Invite reflection in the end, right? So let's take a look at a few examples here. So here is an improvement context, right? Something that I would like, it's an opportunity for improvement. I would like to change. So the situation, I can say something like this. I describe the situation when we were discussing the events, I noticed you interrupt the other person a few times before they could finish. That's the behavior. So the impact, that seemed to be harder, to make it harder for them to express their points. And it may have created some defensiveness there for them. So here's the action. I invite you to allow them to finish sharing first before you respond. As this way, we can create a more balanced and respectful exchange. What do you think about that? Right? So you have a whole step-by-step opportunity there to go through the situation, the behavior, the impact, the action suggested, and the opportunity for reflection. Another improvement example here. When the other person was describing their frustration, you said it's just ridiculous and you laughed. That could feel invalidating and cause the other person to shut down, even if that wasn't your intention. So I encourage you to disagree in a way that it still leaves space for mutual understanding. You could ask some clarifying questions, or maybe you can state your perspective a little bit more respectful of their feelings and the emotions they are expressing. What do you think of that? How's that for you? Right? That's another situation. Now, it's important to realize that feedback is relevant not only when we want to see improvement, but also when we want to see more of what was done. As a positive reinforcement, feedback can be great in providing positive reinforcement. And so here is a different context, which is the encouraging context, where I want to encourage a certain kind of behavior. So here I would say, I noticed when we were discussing the events, you were calm and you explained your views very clearly without assigning any blame. Here's the impact. That helped keep the conversation grounded. It made it easier for the other person to listen and stay engaged. I encourage you to continue doing that because it's very supportive and it helps a productive dialogue. How do you feel about doing more of that? Right? So you create an opportunity for planting seeds of what you want to see more of. Another encouraging example here. Oh, I noticed that when we were talking about deadlines, you acknowledged your role in what happened and you took responsibility. That helped lower the tension and allowed us to move forward and find solutions. So I invite you to keep bringing that level of self-awareness into the conversation, because it models, it models that to everyone else. Do you agree with that? Do you see that? That's another way of creating this encouraging feedback. And so a culture of providing feedback is very important in a mediation, where you start signaling to the parties what you want to cultivate more of and things that can be done differently. Of course, the improvement feedback, you may want to do that in caucus, in a private opportunity, just to be more conscious of the tender subject that it's brought forward there. But encouraging context is very well received when you are with all parties, so that everyone is listening to what's encouraged in that situation. You just have to be careful not to do too much encouraging feedback to one party and not much encouraging feedback to the other party, because then it can start symbolizing some kind of bias that you don't want to do that. So just be aware of fairness in that sense. But another way to give constructive feedback is to create safety, create psychological safety. So an example here is, well, during the first part of our mediation, when I asked you to share your perspective, I noticed you gave a very brief responses and you avoided eye contact. The impact that made it difficult for me and for the other person to know what's going on with you, what you're really feeling and what you need. So if you are feeling uncomfortable or uncertain, please let me know. That's the action. Please let me know. I'm here to support you in expressing yourself. How do you feel about that? How can I help you express? Right? So it's a way of drawing, especially personalities that are withdrawn, to kind of engage them into the conversation and to bring them into the table. And you may want to do this also in private, in a caucus, because if they have a hard time expressing, in the big room, that's not where you want to plant that seed. You may want to start planting that seed in a caucus before they can come and express more fully in the room with all the parties. I also have here a chart that compares the destructive feedback with constructive feedback in all these levels. So in terms of purpose, the destructive feedback demoralizes and criticizes, while the constructive feedback is really helping the person improve. It's focused on specific actions that can be taken rather than personal traits and the character of the person. In terms of tone, the destructive feedback can be imposing, can be harsh, can be blaming, can feel like pointing fingers, when the constructive feedback is more of a supportive, respectful, and empathetic comment aimed at growth. In terms of clarity, destructive feedback is usually vague. It doesn't have an actionable step to take, when the constructive feedback offers a specificity and actionable steps that you can actually implement. The next one is on focus. Destructive feedback usually feels like a personal arrow, right, into our character, into our personal attributes, and sometimes things that we feel like I can't change. That's who I am. While constructive feedback steps out of that. It focuses on behavior, on things that are changeable, that are mutable, that we can choose, and we can choose better, right? It can be a behavior, it can be a vocabulary, or some situation or task that can be changed. Another one is progress. Destructive behavior focus on error rather than on future, on how we are going to move forward. It keeps focusing on the past, on the error made in the past, while a constructive feedback is future forward, right? It's looking at the future and how things can progress moving forward. The other one is energy. Destructive feedback often rides in an energy of attack, when constructive feedback, it has to do with something for consideration, a suggestion, right? We can even ask permission if you can offer, may I offer feedback? That's something that can be done also. That also shows the next point, which is the source. It shows compassion and generosity of spirit, rather than coming from a place of frustration, impatience, and criticism. The basis for constructive feedback is usually on facts, on something factual that happened and was observable, rather than just my judgments, my assumptions, or my biases. So it feels like a period. Destructive feedback feels like a period. This is it, period. And there is no more to talk about. While constructive feedback is an ellipsis. It's an opening for a deeper conversation. It's an opening for a deeper elaboration of what can be done. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about receiving feedback. As a mediator or as a person in general, it's very important to learn how to receive feedback gracefully. And one of the first things is silence. Just listen. No need to respond. Just listen and absorb fully before responding, if you have to respond, right? Separate the message from the messenger. It's not personal about the person that is giving you the feedback. It's really, what's the objective message here, and does that serve me? And in every feedback, you got to use your own filter, use the parts that serve you and let go of the parts that don't serve you, so you got to kind of sense where that message hits and how to use it. Now, if it triggers something in you, it's usually because there's something there that can be resolved. So pay attention to your inner state. Ask clarifying questions and manage those triggers inside. If something is being triggered inside of you, notice, okay, if it's triggering, then there is some kind of defensiveness, some kind of judgment that it's awakening with this feedback. What is that? Pause, breathe, and reflect. Ask yourself, what am I attached to here? Why is this being triggered? Do I remember being triggered like this before? Does this remind me of something in my past? And so you can then kind of see the sequence of origin of that kind of triggering feeling, and kind of recognize that there's materials there open for resolution that goes far beyond the situation at hand, and it can really help you find profound healing. And also, if there's a trigger, if you can let go, or if you can bracket it, right? You recognize your trigger, you put it in a bracket. You may not deal with it now. You go through the feedback, the reception of the feedback right there. And then you go back and you look at that trigger and you try to resolve that inner material in your own private space, afterwards. And so this is a way of receiving feedback in a balanced state, in a state that you're present and balanced and calm. What are the barriers to feedback? The blocks to feedback? Well, the blocks to giving feedback is usually we don't want to create any more conflict, or don't want to create an opportunity for rejection. Sometimes we don't know how to say it. We are uncertain about how to say it. There may be assumptions and biases in our feedback as well, or there may be lack of psychological safety. I don't feel safe giving the feedback because there could be retaliation, or there's some kind of emotional entanglement. I'm projecting my own emotional material into someone else. I'm seeing in them something that is unresolved in me. And so I don't want to give that feedback until I clarify what's really happening. And then in receiving feedback, it can be hard because we can become guarded and defensive. We can start shaming ourselves and create levels of self-criticism. We can be, we don't trust the person who gave us feedback, which is, it can happen. It can be delivered in poor timing, in a poor delivery, in public, or something that it's really a situation that is very difficult to accept that feedback. Or that feedback can face our own fixed mindset. It can either be I'm in a fixed mindset that cannot receive whatever serves me in that feedback, or the other person can be in a fixed mindset that it is unable to see beyond what they think it is. And so there you go, your common sense to look at those blocks to feedback. But as a mediator, how we can overcome these blockages is one, by modeling feedback skills with clarity and compassion, right? Use the feedback formula, right? The situation, the behavior, the impact, the action, and the reflection. So we model that framework when giving feedback. We can create safety by setting up the grounds, affirming our intention, cultivate this culture of feedback so it becomes spontaneous, normalize feedback as part of the growth. Use the framework I just mentioned, right? The situation, behavior, impact, action, and reflection. Name emotions. Oh, I noticed this. I noticed you feel upset, or I noticed this was difficult for you. And name emotions and resistance, because then it creates curiosity, it creates openness instead of confrontation, and it cultivates self-awareness. Feedback is one of the best tools to cultivate awareness of ourselves, awareness of others, and create a deeper respect for the diversity of human personalities. So the key takeaways here is to cultivate a culture of feedback as a bridge, not as a barrier. Feedback creates connection, creates bridge when it's done appropriately. Cultivate a culture of self-awareness and observation, where we are aware of ourselves, aware of others, observing ourselves, observing others. Practicing the SBIAR model that we talked about, and build trust through this consistent and respectful way of connecting with one another over time. One reflective inquiry I have to leave you with is, what is one shift that you can make today that will help you give and receive feedback more skillfully? So what is one thing you would like to apply from what we talked about today? I hope this is helpful to you. Here is a little page on my background and ways to contact me. If I can be of service, please feel free to be in touch. Thank you so much.